Far away in a quiet part of the galaxy, there was a world that once shone brightly with peace. Its skies were filled with crystal towers that touched the clouds, and its oceans sang with gentle waves that reflected the light of two suns. The people who lived there were not warriors or conquerors. They were builders, singers, and dreamers. For centuries they had lived in harmony, creating art and knowledge rather than weapons and fear. They believed the universe was a place of beauty, a home filled with endless friends waiting to be discovered. But the truth of the stars proved far colder. A shadow fell upon their world, a shadow they could not push away. First it was hunger. The soil that once grew food so easily began to dry and crack. Their crops withered under strange changes in their climate. Next, it was conflict. Different nations on their world, once united, began to argue and fight over the little that remained. What started as shouting across councils turned into skirmishes in the streets. Neighbors who once shared songs now carried anger in their eyes. And then, when they were already weak, outsiders came. A stronger, crueler race discovered their fragile home. These invaders saw no beauty in the world. They only saw resources to steal, people to control, and a chance to grow stronger while others grew weaker. The peaceful race tried to resist, but their fleets were small and their weapons few. They had never prepared for war because they never believed it would find them. Their elegant starships meant for exploration were shattered in the first battle. Cities that once glowed with life fell into silence. Families hid in underground shelters, afraid to step outside. Slowly their spirit dimmed. A people of art and hope became a people of fear. They were fading. When the last council gathered, their voices trembled with despair. Some said they should surrender and hope for mercy, but even mercy was not guaranteed. Others argued they should continue fighting, but their numbers were too few. And then one elder, her face lined with the wisdom of centuries, spoke quietly. "If we cannot save ourselves," she said, "then perhaps someone out there will hear us. Perhaps we are not alone." The council fell into silence. They all knew of the ancient transmitters hidden deep within their archives, machines able to send messages across stars. They had never been used for war, only for greetings of peace. To send a message now would be an act of desperation. But desperation was all they had left. So with heavy hearts they gathered the last of their strength. Engineers powered the great machine, its towers glowing faintly in the darkness. For hours they worked, encoding their message into every frequency they could. Their words were simple and raw, not dressed in poetry, not hidden in pride. It was a cry that came from the soul of a dying world. "Please," the message said, "we are falling. Our children will not see another dawn. Our homes are burning. We ask not as rulers, not as warriors, but as living beings. If anyone can hear us, help us." As the message left their world, they knew the chances were slim. Space was vast, and who could say if another race would even hear it? And even if someone did, would they care? The galaxy was filled with empires that turned away from suffering. Why would anyone answer a small, fragile world in its final hour? Yet hope, no matter how faint, was still hope. Mothers held their children tighter that night, whispering that maybe someone kind would hear. Soldiers on broken walls lifted their eyes to the sky, wondering if help was on the way. The council members sat together in silence, waiting, though they knew replies across such distances could take years. But even years of waiting felt better than the silence of hopelessness. As the stars stretched above them, some wept softly. They wept because they were proud of their people, proud of the art they had made, the songs they had sung, the love they had shared. They wept because they did not want their light to vanish without being remembered. And deep in their hearts they prayed that the universe would prove gentler than it had been. What they did not know, what they could never imagine, was that their cry for help would reach a world unlike any they had ever dreamed of. A world that was itself forged in storms and fire. A place so dangerous that the galaxy had quietly named its people Deathworlders. To the peaceful aliens, this name would have sounded like doom, but names can be misleading. For those Deathworlders, when someone cried for help, they listened. And so while the fragile world drifted closer to its end, across the void of endless space, A signal reached the blue planet, called Earth. In that moment, though the aliens did not yet realize it, the course of their fate had begun to change. On Earth, the night was quiet when the signal first arrived. In a small observatory far from the noise of cities, a group of scientists were scanning the skies like they always did. Their computers hummed, recording endless streams of data, most of it just background noise from stars and galaxies millions of light years away. But suddenly, among the static, a pattern appeared. It was faint, almost hidden, but it repeated. One of the researchers leaned forward, frowning at the screen. At first, they thought it was just interference from Earth's satellites or a random glitch in the system. But as the pattern continued, they realized it was something different, something deliberate. Excitement and fear spread through the small room. The team worked quickly, cleaning up the signal, filtering out the noise. Slowly, a message began to take shape. The more they decoded, the more silent the room became. It wasn't a greeting, not like the hopeful signals Earth itself had once sent into space. It wasn't a warning either. It was something raw and heavy, words filled with pain. Help us. We are falling. Our children will not survive. If anyone can hear us, please help. No one spoke for a long time. Some of the scientists felt chills run down their spines. Others rubbed their eyes in disbelief. They had dreamed all their lives of hearing from another civilization. But not like this. They had expected curiosity, wonder, maybe even pride from those who lived beyond Earth. Instead, they were hearing despair. Within hours, the signal was confirmed by other stations around the world. Every major government was alerted. In secret, rooms filled with glowing screens, leaders sat in silence as the alien voice played. For once, even those who were often divided by politics or borders listened together. The weight of the message was impossible to ignore. But after the shock, debate began. Some leaders argued that Earth was not ready. Humanity had its own problems: hunger, poverty, wars, and divisions. How could they help another species when they still struggled to help themselves? Others warned of danger. What if it was a trap? What if the message was not from victims but from conquerors, trying to lure humanity into a war it could not win? Yet, while the powerful argued, the message began to spread among ordinary people. Somehow it leaked beyond government walls and reached the public. Soon, people everywhere were talking about it, in classrooms, in cafes, in homes, and on every screen. The effect was strange. Normally, the world was full of noise, of disagreements and distractions. But when people listened to that alien voice, many felt the same thing in their hearts: sorrow and responsibility. It was true that humans came from a harsh planet. Earth was filled with storms, earthquakes, diseases, and predators. To survive, humans had become tough, stubborn, and clever. They had fought wars and made mistakes, but they had also learned compassion. Over time, they had grown into a species that could cross oceans, climb mountains, and reach the stars. Now, hearing the cry of another people so far away, they felt something stirred deep inside them. In cities and villages, people began writing messages of support. Artists painted murals of hands reaching out to the stars. Children asked their parents why no one was helping yet. Volunteers stood ready, even though they didn't know how to cross such distances. If they need us, many said, we cannot turn away. Scientists and engineers were inspired. They dusted off old plans for starships that had once been considered impossible. If another world needed help, then perhaps impossibility no longer mattered. Soldiers, too, listened closely. They were used to defending their nations, but the thought of defending another species filled them with a strange kind of pride. Even medics, teachers, and builders began to dream of what they could offer. The idea of helping was no longer just about survival. It was about proving what it truly meant to be human. Meanwhile, in the halls of power, the arguments continued. Some leaders remained cautious, afraid of the unknown. But slowly, voices of courage grew louder. Humanity had always been defined by its choices in the darkest hours. In history, when floods came, people built together. When fires spread, neighbors carried each other to safety. When wars ended, broken nations rebuilt with the help of others. Perhaps now it was time to do the same, only on a greater scale. At last, after many long nights, a decision was made. Earth would not stay silent. The answer would not be perfect, the journey would not be easy, and the risks would be enormous. But humanity had always carried a spark of defiance against hopelessness. If someone cried for help, then it was not in their nature to ignore it. When the first message was sent back across the stars, it carried a simple promise. We hear you. You are not alone. We will come. The words were not written in poetry or polished speeches. They were plain, but they carried strength. They carried the heart of humanity. News spread across Earth like fire. People cheered, not because they were about to meet aliens, but because they were about to help them. For once, humanity was not reaching outward for conquest or for curiosity. They were reaching outward for compassion. In the observatories where the signal was first heard, the scientists looked again at the night sky. It no longer seemed so distant, so empty. Somewhere out there, lives were waiting, counting on them. Somewhere out there, fear and despair might soon be replaced with hope. And though many still feared what lay ahead, one truth had become clear. Humanity, the so-called Deathworlders, had chosen to listen. And when they listened, they answered. The decision had been made. Humanity was going to answer the call. Yet deciding was one thing and acting was another. Across the planet, people asked the same question. How? Earth had never sent a ship so far, not to another star, not to a world. That was crying for rescue. The challenge seemed larger than anything humanity had ever attempted. But when something seemed impossible, that was often when humans became their strongest. In research centers and space agencies, engineers worked without rest. They studied old blueprints of engines meant for deep space, designs that had been shelved because they were too costly or too risky. Now those plans were dusted off and reshaped. Nations that once competed for space achievements suddenly shared secrets and technology. Rivalries that had lasted decades faded when they remembered the voice that had begged for help. For the first time in history, humanity's brightest minds worked as one team. The ships they built were not perfect. They lacked the elegance of alien craft described in the intercepted records. Their designs were practical, heavy and full of bolts and wires, but they were strong, built for endurance. Inside there was no luxury, only tight corridors and walls lined with supplies. Every space was used for food, medicine, and tools, because this was not a mission of exploration, it was a mission of aid. People from all walks of life volunteered. Soldiers trained to protect, not to conquer. Doctors studied alien biology as best they could, knowing they might be asked to treat wounds unlike any they had ever seen. Engineers packed toolboxes with equipment that could repair bridges, shelters, or power systems. Teachers even volunteered, ready to bring knowledge and comfort to children who might have lost their schools. The call for help had awakened something powerful in humans. It was not just about saving a distant world. It was about proving who they were at their core. Families gathered at spaceports to say goodbye. There were tears, of course, because no one knew if those leaving would ever return. Yet there was also pride. Parents hugged their children, whispering that they were going to be part of history. Friends clasped hands, promising to meet again under the same sky. Even those who stayed behind felt connected to the mission, for it was not the work of a few but the work of an entire species. When the first fleet of ships lifted off, the world watched together. Screens glowed in every home, in every city, showing the engines flare as the great machines rose into the sky. There was silence, then cheering, then tears. Humanity had taken its first step not just to the stars, but toward becoming something greater. The journey was long and difficult. Space was cold, silent, and full of dangers. The crews faced long days of routine, checking systems, repairing faults, and rationing supplies carefully. Some grew homesick, missing the smell of Earth's forests or the sound of its oceans. But whenever spirits began to fade, they remembered the message. They remembered the desperate voice saying, "Our children will not survive." That memory gave them strength. On board, life was simple but disciplined. Soldiers ran drills in the narrow corridors, practicing how to protect not only themselves but also the aliens they had sworn to help. Medics spent hours studying alien words and symbols, preparing to understand patients who might not even share their biology. Engineers checked oxygen levels, fuel supplies, and the engines that carried them forward. Every person knew their role mattered, and that together they were carrying Earth's promise across the void. When the fleet finally crossed the distance and approached the alien system, tension filled every cabin. From the viewing ports, the crews saw the alien world for the first time. It was beautiful even in its suffering. Blue seas dotted with islands, green forests cut by deep scars of war, and cities that glowed faintly with broken lights. But what struck the humans most was not the planet itself, but the silence. No welcoming fleets, no shining cities in the skies, only a quiet, wounded world waiting. As the ships descended, the aliens who had survived watched with wide, fearful eyes. To them, humanity was a mystery. Their records, scattered from ancient explorers, had spoken of Earth as a dangerous place, a death world where storms tore landscapes apart, where predators hunted day and night, and where survival was a constant battle. They had always thought that if such a species reached them, it would bring destruction, not salvation. The first human boots touched the alien soil with heavy thuds. The soldiers formed a protective line, not to attack but to ensure safety for those who carried medicine and supplies. Slowly, hatches opened, and people in plain uniforms stepped out. They did not raise weapons. Instead, they lifted their hands, in open gestures of peace. Behind them, crates of food, water filters, and medical kits were unloaded. At first, the aliens trembled. Their leaders, weak and weary, stared at these strange beings with suspicion. The humans were taller, broader, and scarred by the hardships of their world. Their eyes were sharp, their movements strong. Everything about them seemed to confirm the old stories, that Deathworlders were fearsome, unstoppable, and dangerous. But then the humans began to work. They carried children from ruined shelters, wrapping them in blankets. They gave water to the thirsty, kneeling beside them with gentle hands. Doctors set up clinics in broken halls, treating wounds and illnesses without hesitation. Engineers repaired broken generators, bringing light back to homes that had sat in darkness for months. Slowly, the aliens' fear began to waver. The humans never acted like conquerors. They acted like neighbors. Their strength, which had once seemed terrifying, now became a shield. Their determination, which had once seemed harsh, now became hope. Step by step, the aliens began to realize that these strangers had not come to rule them. They had come to save them. For the humans, there was no question. This was why they had come. They were Deathworlders, yes, born of storms, tempered by hardship, survivors of a world that tested them every day. But because of that, they knew what it meant to struggle. They knew what it meant to need help. And now, they would make sure. No one cried out in despair without an answer. The first step forward had been taken, and nothing would ever be the same again. When the humans first arrived, the aliens watched from a distance, their eyes full of fear. These beings looked nothing like them. Their bodies seemed powerful, built from a lifetime of surviving storms and dangers. Their skin carried marks, scars that hinted at struggles long past. Their eyes were sharp, bright with determination. The aliens whispered among themselves that perhaps they had made a mistake. Maybe calling out to the stars had only brought them predators. For many days, the aliens stayed cautious. When humans walked through the ruins carrying crates of food or supplies, alien families pulled their children closer. When human doctors set up clinics, some refused to approach, afraid the medicine would harm them. Even when humans offered water, trembling hands hesitated before accepting. The fear was not hatred, it was instinct. To the aliens, humans seemed too strong, too unyielding. How could such creatures understand gentleness? But slowly, things began to change. The first moment of trust came quietly. One afternoon, a human medic noticed a small alien child sitting alone by the ruins of a broken home. The child's skin was pale, their breathing shallow. The human knelt down, taking off their helmet so the child could see their face. With a gentle smile, the human held out a small piece of food. The child hesitated, then reached out with shaking fingers. When the food was eaten and the medic gave water, the child's eyes softened. From a distance, the mother of the child wept. She realized these Deathworlders were not here to take, but to give. Word spread. More families began to visit the human clinics. They discovered that the medicine truly worked, that wounds healed and fevers faded. When engineers repaired broken machines, the lights flickered back to life for the first time in months. Children laughed when water flowed clean from the rebuilt pumps. Bit by bit, the fear began to weaken. The aliens still watched carefully, but their eyes no longer held only suspicion. The humans worked tirelessly. They slept in shifts, often, eating less so they could share more with the starving families. Soldiers who had once trained for battle carried bricks to rebuild schools. Pilots who had flown ships through dangerous space now drove trucks filled with supplies. Even in exhaustion, they pressed on. When storms swept across the land, they stood firm, protecting shelters with their own bodies. The aliens had never seen such determination. One night, as rain poured heavily, a group of aliens found themselves trapped in a collapsing shelter. The walls shook, and the roof began to cave in. Panic spread quickly. Then, through the storm, humans arrived. They did not hesitate. Using ropes and bare strength, they pulled beams away and carried the trapped survivors out one by one. The storm cut their skin. The weight of the debris strained their muscles, but they did not stop until everyone was safe. When the last survivor was pulled out, the humans were covered in mud, their uniforms torn. Yet they smiled, even as exhaustion dragged at their bodies. From that night onward, the aliens looked at them differently. Slowly, conversations began. At first, the words were broken, translated by machines that struggled with the differences in language, but soon, laughter began to replace silence. Children were the first to approach the humans without fear. They ran beside them, curious about their tools and eager to mimic their strange ways. A soldier taught a group of alien children how to play a simple Earth game using a ball. Their laughter echoed through the ruins, a sound the aliens had not heard in many months. Parents watched with tears in their eyes, realizing that trust was beginning to grow. Even the leaders of the alien people changed their view. At first, they had kept their distance, speaking only in formal words. But as they saw how the humans worked, not for power, not for control, but for kindness, they began to step closer. In one council meeting, an alien elder stood and said, softly, "These beings frighten us because they are strong, but perhaps it is their strength that will save us, not destroy us." Heads nodded slowly, and the room was filled not with fear but with cautious hope. The humans, for their part, never demanded thanks. They never asked for tribute or loyalty. They only asked for trust. Whenever they looked into alien eyes filled with doubt, they answered with patience. Whenever someone trembled in their presence, they softened their voices and lowered their weapons. They knew that trust could not be forced. It had to be earned through actions, not words. The aliens began to notice the little things too. They saw how humans comforted their own when someone was injured. They saw how they shared food equally, never taking more than anyone else. They saw how they worked side by side, no one claiming to be above the others. To a people who had once believed these visitors were monsters, these small acts became powerful. They began to whisper among themselves not of fear, but of admiration. Day by day, the wall between the two peoples crumbled. Where there had once been trembling silence, there were now conversations by firelight. Where there had once been suspicion, there was now cautious respect. And behind it all, a new bond was forming. The aliens realized that while humans came from a world of storms, that world had also taught them how to protect, how to endure, and how to care for others who struggled. The moment that sealed this new bond came during another attack. Remnants of the hostile invaders returned, hoping to crush the weakened world once and for all. The aliens panicked, knowing they could not defend themselves. But the humans stood their ground. They did not run, they did not abandon those they had come to help. With their ships and courage, they fought back fiercely, protecting villages and cities until the attackers fled. When the battle ended, the aliens gathered around them, no longer with fear, but with gratitude. They had seen it with their own eyes. The Deathworlders were not here to conquer. They were here to shield them. And so what had begun with trembling fear slowly became trust. What had started with suspicion turned into respect. The aliens began to believe in the humans, not just as visitors, but as friends. For the first time in a long time, they looked toward the future not with despair, but with hope. The war that had haunted the alien world for so long was finally over. The invaders had retreated, their forces broken and their power diminished. For the first time in many years, the skies were clear and the streets were quiet. The people who survived stepped outside their shelters, blinking in the sunlight, taking in the ruins of their cities. It was a sight that could have filled them with despair, but it did not, because they were not alone. The humans, the Deathworlders who had come across the stars, were still there. They walked through the streets with quiet determination, helping where they could. They lifted debris from roads, rebuilt broken walls, and carried water to those who were still weak. They worked tirelessly, never stopping to rest, as if they understood that the world needed more than just protection. It needed hope. And slowly, that hope began to grow again in the hearts of the aliens. Children ran alongside the humans, laughing and playing in ways that had been impossible during the dark days. Schools reopened in shelters repaired by engineers from Earth. Families gathered around fires, sharing stories and meals. Even the elders, who had once doubted the humans' intentions, began to smile and speak openly with them. The humans did not demand anything in return. They did not claim land or power. They simply gave, helping the aliens rebuild what had been lost. As days turned into weeks, the bond between the two peoples grew stronger. The aliens taught humans about their world, the rivers that could heal certain illnesses, the plants that could feed many families, the traditions that had survived generations of hardship. In return, humans shared knowledge of technology, medicine, and engineering. Together they repaired not only the structures of the world but also the spirit of its people. Where fear had once ruled, trust now took root. One evening, the alien leaders gathered in a restored hall, their faces filled with emotion. They looked out at the humans who had worked alongside their people for weeks, who had never faltered in the face of danger or hardship. One elder stood, his voice shaking with pride and gratitude. "We called to the stars when all seemed lost," he said. "We never expected an answer, yet they came, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as friends. They came because we needed help. They came because they cared, and for that we will never forget them." The humans listened quietly, not seeking praise, only listening with respect. Some nodded, some smiled softly. They had done what they believed was right. For them, the act of helping was not about recognition, it was about being true to themselves, to the values that had defined their species for millennia. They had grown up on a planet of storms and dangers, learning to survive, to protect, and to endure. That experience had prepared them to face challenges far beyond their world. And now they had proven that strength could be used for compassion, not destruction. Over time, the alien world healed. Cities were rebuilt, gardens flourished, and children, once again, played in open fields. The humans did not leave immediately. They stayed long enough to ensure that the aliens could care for themselves. They trained teachers and engineers, shared knowledge of medicine and technology, and prepared systems that would allow the alien civilization to thrive without further outside help. By the time the humans finally departed, there was a sense of peace and security that had been missing for decades. As their ships lifted off the surface, the aliens gathered to watch. They waved, not in fear, but in love and gratitude. Many cried, tears of relief and joy, knowing that these strange, powerful visitors had changed their lives forever. The humans waved back, smiling, knowing that their journey had not been easy but had been worth every hardship. For both species, this moment was not an ending. It was a beginning. Back on Earth, the humans returned as heroes, though they did not seek titles or fame. They shared stories of the alien world, of the struggles they had faced, and of the lives they had touched. The world listened, inspired by what had been accomplished. Humanity had shown that even when faced with the unknown, when confronted by fearsome creatures or impossible odds, they could act with courage, compassion, and determination. Their name, once feared across the galaxy as Deathworlders, had now become synonymous with hope and help. The aliens, too, never forgot. They recorded the story of humanity in their histories, teaching their children and grandchildren about the beings who had answered a desperate cry for help. They spoke of the humans' patience, their endurance, and their unwavering kindness. They told stories of how fear had turned into trust, how despair had turned into hope, and how lives that had almost been lost were saved because someone dared to care. In the years that followed, contact between the two worlds continued. Trade, culture, and knowledge flowed freely, and friendships blossomed. The aliens learned from the humans' resilience, while humans marveled at the aliens' creativity and wisdom. The bond that had been forged in the darkest hours became stronger than ever, a testament to what could happen when compassion overcame fear. And so, what began as a desperate cry in the void became a story of unity, courage, and friendship. The Lao, aliens had called for help, trembling with fear and hope, and the Deathworlders had answered. They had shown that even across the stars, even between worlds that seemed impossibly different, life could be saved through determination, understanding, and heart. The galaxies were vast and often cold, but now there was proof that kindness could travel farther than any weapon, and hope could shine brighter than any star. In the end, both species learned the same lesson, that true strength is not in power or fear, but in the choice to protect, to endure, and to care for others, even when the odds seem impossible. And in that choice, they found not only survival but a bond that would last for generations, a living memory of the moment when two worlds came together united by courage and compassion.